Warriors of price action and guardians of fundamentals, welcome to Retail Recon. On today's Recon Reports episode, we're conducting a full tactical debrief on a trade that went sideways, then south, then straight into a wall. Nike. This one was one of my worst trades so far this year, and it ended up in a net loss of $1,558. It started as a basic covered call setup, but the exact risk that makes these trades dangerous eventually showed up on the battlefield. There are some important lessons buried in this one, so let's break it down. Nike was trading in a relatively defined range and moving sideways, which made it look like a good candidate for a covered call position. The stock was also holding around its 22 EMA, which added to the sense that it might stay contained for a while. The initial deployment was simple. I bought 100 shares at an average price of 63.20. Right away, I started selling calls against that position, and for a few sessions, the trade behaved exactly as planned. Then, the conditions changed. Nike drifted lower, and that decline started building pressure on the stock leg. By the time the price reached around 52, I was already down more than 15%. According to my own rulebook, that trade should have been closed long before then because I have a hard 10% exit rule on stock positions. But I didn't take the exit. Why? Looking back, it was psychology. I had recently taken a bad trade in Novo Nordisk where the stock gapped down hard overnight and I closed it immediately at the open. That loss was manageable and within my risk limits, but the truth is simple. Nobody enjoys taking another hit right after the last one. So instead of sticking to the structure, I started gambling. Nike was about to report earnings, and I convinced myself that a strong report might spike the stock enough to help me recover some of the damage. Meanwhile, the option premiums were still decent, so I kept selling calls and collecting premium while hoping for a turnaround. That was the mistake. Earnings came in and the stock got hit hard. From around 52 down to 44, roughly another 15% decline. At that point, the trade was no longer under control. It was time to exfil. I started using every small bounce as an exit opportunity and kept reducing the position until I finally closed it out on April the 17th. Painful, but necessary. What went wrong? The core problem here was not the setup. It was the failure to respect the exit. The trade started as a range-bound covered call, but once the range broke, the thesis was damaged. Instead of cutting the position when the setup failed, I stayed in and tried to force a recovery. That turned a manageable trade into a much larger loss. The real danger in a covered call setup is not just the stock can go down. It's that the premium you collect can make you think you're protected when you're not. Premium helps, but it doesn't save a broken trade. Let's go through the damage. Stock leg loss $1,807. Options leg profit $249. Net result negative $1,558. Return on invested capital negative 24.56%. That loss was more than double what I would have taken if I had followed my own rules of engagement and exited at the 10% threshold. So yes, this trade was a clear failure in execution, but it also delivered a very useful lessons. Key takeaways. First, respect your rules of engagement. Your trading plan exists for a reason. If your rule says exit at 10%, then exit at 10%. Do not move the line just because you don't want to take the loss. Second, if the thesis breaks, the trade is over. This trade was built on the idea that the Nike would stay contained. Once that range failed, the original premise failed with it. At that point, the correct move was to exit, not hope. And third, hope is not a strategy. Waiting for a miracle is not trading, it's surrendering control. Capital is better redeployed into a fresh setup than tied up into a broken one. If I had to reduce the lesson to one sentence, it would be this: know how to lose. This is one of the most important skills in trading. The real edge comes from knowing when to pull back, preserve capital, and fight the next one with discipline. One more point worth noting. Since this experience, I have almost completely stopped trading stock positions directly. In most cases now, I express my thesis through options instead. Mission recap: Nike looked like a clean covered call setup, but once the stock broke down, the trade stopped working. I ignored my own exit rules, held through earnings, and turned a controlled loss into a much bigger one. And with that, we wrap up this episode of Recon Reports. If you found value in this mission, be sure to lock in your support by liking, subscribing, and following our movement. Thanks for standing watch with me today, and until next time, trade smart, risk sharp, stay on target.